In 2017, December of 2017, I decided to make a New Year's resolution to make a game every week. I foolishly did not know what I was getting myself into, and now I try to prototype a new game every single week ever since then. So the talk is called The Importance of Prototyping. I'm going to go over who I am. Maybe I'll just skip that part. We're going to talk about universal truths that go across different arts. So I have a drawing and painting background, and so that's kind of what I'm going to be referencing the whole time. We're going to talk about what a game is. We're going to talk about making games quickly with no money or experience, which is the way that I started. And then we're going to go over a few games that I've made and the lessons that I've learned through that. So that's a big old picture of me. I have experience in painting, and when I say painting, I mean drawing, actual acrylic and oil painting, and also doing digital media. These are a few more of my drawings. I've also done a little bit of mural work. That's me painting with a couple of my students that I still talk to today. Most recently, I was a caricature artist in Monterey, California, and that was a really fun job. I've also done a little bit of acting. This is me being a very intimidating mobster. And in my latest role, I played Albert Einstein in Steve Martin's Picasso and the Panagio. That's my stupid face. So a lot of my acting came from having to read video games out loud as a kid. Video games didn't have voice acting, so I had to make my own. I also have taught for the last 10 years. I love movies, all kinds of different types of movies, but I love games even more. So we're going to skip through this part. Basically, what I was going to say is that there is no real such thing as talent. No matter what art you are trying to work in, you have to work at it. You have to practice. There is no other way to do it. So I'm just going to skip right ahead to universal truths of art. So working in different mediums, I have understood that there are certain things that cross different art forms. For example, theory, practice, study, process style, and technical skill are the main things I'm going to talk about. So when I say theory, I mean rules. So there are basic rules to any art form. So specifically drawing, right? There are rules of composition. There are rules of rhythm and harmony. And a lot of people might think that art is very free form and that there are no rules, but there are. That's why when you go to a movie, sometimes if you've seen enough movies, for the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, if it's a very predictable movie, you can predict what's going to happen all the way through to the end. That's not to say that movies aren't unique. Every movie is unique, but there are specific storytelling rules that you have to follow in order to keep your audience engaged and not have them be confused. Theory is universal and transferable between mediums. So theories about composition, theories of rhythm, harmony, repetition, color, contour, these are going to transfer between drawing over to painting and even graphic design. If you give a tablet and Photoshop to somebody who has good theory on painting, who knows how to draw very well on paper, they should be able to draw in Photoshop as well. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to understand how to use Photoshop off the bat. They have to learn the tool, but those same theories still apply. The same thing is for an actor who does movies, TV shows, or theater, the same theories carry over. And the last thing is that theories are interconnected. They layer on top of each other. They coexist. Some examples of theory in video games: level design, fun, agency, feel, flow, difficulty, permanence. practice is another thing that is very, very important, and it's kind of the main thing that I'm trying to convey here is that you need to practice in order to get better. And you have to, that means repeating a task over and over again. You're not going to get better at something unless you repeat it. And you're not going to get better at making video games unless you create prototypes. Prototyping is the equivalent of practicing or a sketchbook, right? You also have to have meaningful practice. If you are repeating your same mistakes over and over, that is not meaningful practice. Practice makes permanent. So if you are practicing bad habits, then you are learning how to do things the wrong way, essentially. And the last thing is practice on your own terms. Don't practice on the job. So this is one thing when I was a caricature artist, I would practice doing caricatures at home and I would experiment at home. But when I was out drawing people, I wouldn't experiment. I just recently got a commission to do a mobile game for somebody, and I wasn't going to try and do wildly new things with their game. I was going to stick to what I already knew and what already works. So study is also very important. This means research. A lot of work has already been done. You're not the first person to ever make a game. You're not the first person to ever pick up a paintbrush and draw. So you want to build upon what is already there. So do your research and deconstruct the art that you love. So for video games, go back and play your favorite video games and break them down and analyze them and see what makes them fun, what makes you like them so much. Process is how something is made. Every artist who has ever created any work has a specific process. And so different people have different processes. So even if I want to make a platformer, there are many ways to do that. And your process is going to be defined by your tools and the techniques that you have learned. If I want to make, for example, a platformer, that's going to be different if I do it in Unity or if I do it in GameMaker. Even if they're both pixel art platformers, at the end of it, the way that I got there is invariably going to be different. And the process is unique to you. The more you practice, the more you will discover your own process. Style is very important. What I mean by style is the way that you express yourself, right? Everyone has personal expression. You look at the way that you dress. This is your own personal style. It's your own personal fingerprint. The style is both intentional and not intentional. I specifically want to make arcade games, let's say. So I want to reach that style of arcade games, fast, action-based, maybe pixel art. But then there is also the unintentional, the things that I put there subconsciously without thinking. Somebody just left a review on a game that I made. They say they played my last 3 games and they noticed that they all have humor in them. Now, that's not something that I'm doing intentionally. I'm not trying to make funny games. I'm trying to make arcade games. But through unintentionally, I have been adding humor to all of them, and I think that that's true. You can discover your style through experimentation. So I want to make arcade games, but sometimes the best way to learn how to do that is by going the complete opposite way. If I'm always trying to make the same game, I am no longer learning. So I have to try to make RPGs. I have to try to make strategy games, story-based games, and that will inform the style that I'm trying to achieve and the style that I have. So technical skill, what I mean is that there are different scales of difficulty for the task that you are trying to accomplish, whatever art that may be. So for example, in illustration, it takes a lot of technical skill to create photorealism. Now that doesn't mean that photorealism is better than, let's say, a drawing of Homer Simpson, but it takes more technical skill. So you want to challenge yourself and try to do things that are more difficult. The last thing, if you have a good knowledge of theory, you've done a lot of research, you've studied, you've practiced, put 1,000 hours of practice, you've discovered your process and your style, and you have a lot of technical skill, you still need execution. And so execution is basically the way that you do a task. Now, you may be very talented or you may be very good at what you do, but if you do it sloppily, that's going to show. And a lot of things factor into execution. Effort is a big one. How much time you have. Maybe you don't have a lot of time to do something and you can't execute well. The tools that you have and the mindset that you're in, also the environment that you work in. If you are not in the right mindset, if you don't have the right tools or are in not the best environment to work in, then that's going to affect your execution. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're trying to learn how to draw, carry a sketchbook. If you're trying to learn how to make video games, prototype. That is the equivalent of carrying a sketchbook. You're not going to get better at drawing without sketching all the time. So before we get into prototyping a game, I want to talk about what a game is. And I'm going to compare it to other art forms. So because we started a little bit late, I'm just going to skip over this part. Really quickly, I was going to have a little anecdote about my cat. Now she loves to play hide and seek. She's less than a year old. She's a non-human animal, right? But yet she understands and appreciates play. She understands and appreciates fun. Why is that important? Because there's the question of, does my cat understand and appreciate other art forms? Does it appreciate music? Maybe. I don't have any evidence that it doesn't. But does it appreciate movies? Not really. If I put a movie, she's not very interested in it. Unless I put a video of like birds or like little kittens meowing, then suddenly her ears perk up and she starts to pay attention. Cats versus books. So does my cat appreciate literature? No. My cat will probably never appreciate literature or theater or a painting or something like that. But the cat appreciates games, playing a game. It understands the rules of the game. It understands taking turns, and it's less than a year old. So games are important. At least games are important to my cat, and they're a very big part of her life. And what I'm trying to say is that games are universal. Unlike any other medium, playing a game could be understood by anyone, young or old, and can be appreciated. And so therefore video games are important, because video games are the evolution of just games. They are the digital form of games and that type of interaction. Video games are new. They've only been around for about 50 years. In my lifetime, there was probably a point where I could have played every game that existed, the entire library of all games in my lifetime. Not true anymore. There's way too many games. But because they are so new, then that means that video games are an opportunity. If I pick up a paintbrush, I am competing with every artist that has existed before me, all the way down to Andy Warhol, to Picasso, all the way back to Leonardo da Vinci, to all the way back to the very first cavemen that painted on walls. So video games, because they are so new, they don't really have that, right? Video games are an opportunity to lay the foundation for future generations of artists. Video games are storytelling. Why does art persist so long? Because art tells the story of your culture. It tells the story of you as an individual, as you as a society. Art can be a cautionary tale. It can be a lesson. And video games are the same thing. They are an art form, and therefore they are a story. And story is very important for that reason, because it preserves culture, it teaches lessons, and it entertains. And yes, this is still about my cat. So there was another game that I play with my cat. She has a little stuffed animal that's black, just like her. And at first she hated it. She looked like a cat, so my cat doesn't like other cats, and they would fight it. But now I puppeteer the cat, and I pretend that it eats food and that it scratches on the scratching post and it climbs up the cat tree and it licks herself. And my cat pays attention because this little puppeteering game that I'm playing with her is telling a story. It's telling the story of her life. And that's why this game that we play is like theater. It is art. It is the story of her life, and it is a story that's important to her. And if you tell stories that are important to people, they will pay attention, they will perk up, and they will listen. That's why whenever I put birds or mice on the screen or little kittens, she starts to pay attention because it's a story that's relevant to her. So I talked all about all this theory and all this gibberish about art and storytelling. How do we make games? Well, in order to make a game, and now when I say games, I'm talking about video games specifically. You need a computer, first of all. You need to own a computer to make games, and then you need to be able to communicate with that computer in the computer language. We call that programming. You're probably going to need a game engine, and there's a lot of free ones out there, Unity, Game Maker, and on and on and on. Once you have your game engine and you can communicate with the computer and you could give the computer commands, you need a second computer. A lot of people don't realize that making video games, you are actually programming two computers. What I mean by that is you're programming, yes, the computer that's in front of you, a laptop, a PC, whatever it may be, but you're also programming the human mind. No game is complete without a person. And you're not only teaching the computer how to display images or whatever, you are also teaching the player how to play. The next thing that you need is input. You need a way for this computer and this person to interact with each other. And once you have input, you also need feedback. So when you interact with this computer, something needs to happen, right? Very simple, 6 bullet points. That's all you need to make games. Making games is very, very easy, right? There's this misconception. Anytime I get hired to make a game, everyone thinks that it's really easy. Oh, we'll just add, 10 more levels or add a boss battle at the end. Make it so that the songs shuffle or whatever ridiculous request. And even I think video games are easy. Foolishly, even though I know video games are hard. I always start a project and I think, wow, this is going to be easy. I always think it's going to be easier than it actually is. It is a lot harder than what you think. Making a video game requires all types of art, visual art. It requires music, voice acting, right? You need to know how to program. You need to know how to make sound effects. So you have all of these different art forms. It's very, very difficult to the point where it's almost impossible. Right now, I'm going to say this. There's a lot of video games that are not very good. It's just the way that it is. And video games as an art form have come a long way, especially recently. Compared to other art forms, a lot of people don't take them seriously because a lot of games, maybe they are just not up to the level that, let's say, film is or painting, right? Because they've been around a lot longer. So now we're going to be talking about doing the impossible fast. I just convinced you that games are really hard to make. So now let's do it very fast. I'm going to tell you a few things that games are not. Games are not ideas. Everyone thinks that I have a great idea for a game, therefore I am great at making games. Games are not ideas. Games are made. They are not in your mind, they are made. Making games is not copying games. So when I would teach a cartooning class, and we would go over how to create our own characters, how to draw their faces, how to pose the characters, creating a background to them. Then the day would come when you would have to create your own character. And I would always have to say, don't draw SpongeBob, because inevitably, every time I gave this assignment of creating your own character, somebody would draw SpongeBob and say, oh, this is Sponge Dan or something, and he has purple pants, so he's a completely new character. He lives in an apple under the sea, not a pineapple. That is not creating a new character. And copying another game and starting from the viewpoint of, oh, I'm just going to make Zelda, but Link's hat is going to be purple. That's not the way that you make games. Games are not design documents. A lot of people like to design games on paper, and I'm guilty of this too. I like to imagine what the game is going to be, every aspect of it, every level, every skill tree. But when you program it into a computer, it changes. When you put it into a person's hand, it is different. Games are not pre-written. So a game, what makes a game different from other mediums, yes, it tells a story, but the story is not complete without a person. Now, you could have a script, you could have a story. I'm not saying don't have any lore, but what I'm saying is that the real story is told through the interaction of the player and the computer. Sorry, I'm just taking a drink of water. So games are not pre-written. The best games tell a different story every time you play them. So when you start by making a prototype, you have to ask yourselves these questions. You have to determine the game's purpose. What am I trying to do with this game? I recently got commissioned to make a game that was to promote a song. So we needed to double as a music video. You need to consider your target platform. What is this going to be played on? What is the input going to be? And then you pick an engine that can work for these things. There's supposed to be pictures here. So then you decide on the viewpoint. And in my mind, there are only three different views. There's a top-down view, there's a side view, like a side scroller, and then there's an immersive view, which is like a 3D on the ground view. And this is going to determine not only your art style, but also how you program the game. Pick a verb. So a game is essentially just an action word. Shoot, jump, run. These are verbs, right? These are game mechanics. And you only need one to name, especially if you're prototyping. If you're trying to make a game that runs, jumps, and shoots, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you're trying to make 3 games. Now, you might think this is contradictory because all the games that you play have many verbs. Think of like a Fallout or Grand Theft Auto, right? Fallout is a first-person shooter that is also an RPG that also has leveling up and has dialogue trees, right? Grand Theft Auto is like a million games in one. You could play poker in it. You could bowl. You could, drive cars and stuff. These longer form games are actually a bunch of little games strung together. They are actually a bunch of prototypes, one right after the other, layered on top of each other. Film is the same way. A feature film is actually a bunch of short films strung together. Each little scene is actually its own self-contained short film. So pick a verb, pick one if you can. Then make it fun. Add special effects. Add camera shake, right? Every game can be improved with special effects, with screen flash, with particle effects, right? Candy Crush is essentially just Bejeweled, but with camera shake and screen flash and big sparks and really satisfying sound effects, right? So add sounds to your game. Every action should have a sound. When you're adding sound effects, you want to create a sort of an auditory language, and you want to get to the point where the game can be played without looking at the screen. ideally. I remember seeing this like mini documentary of this guy who was blind and would still play Street Fighter competitively. Um, right, so you want to layer your sounds when you make sound effects. So if you have a sword swinging action, you want to have um, different layers to that sound. So if you hit a zombie, that should have a sound effect, but it should have your sword swinging sound effect layered into that. Turn the volume down on your sound effects. Whenever I make sounds, I try to turn the volume down, and then when I put it into the game engine, I play it back at no higher than 30%. There is nothing more annoying than really loud sound effects, but most of the time I turn it down to like about 15%, maybe even lower, but no higher than 30%. As soon as you put your sound effect in there, lower the volume of that sound effect. Important sounds stop other sounds for a second. This is just to add effect. If you have an explosion, then you want the volume of all your other sound effects to go down for a second. Add music, add a song to your game. There's so much free music out there, and there are so many musicians out there that are willing to make music for a game. Just go out there on Discord, go out there in a chat room, go out on Twitter, and ask people to tell people that you need music, and you're going to be surprised at how many musicians hit you up. Or just do a quick Google search for free music, right? Have at least one song in your game. It makes all of the difference. And if you're going to have 2 songs in your game, the instinct might be, okay, well, I'm going to have a different song for every level. But what you should really do is try to create that auditory language. Have a song for gameplay, and then have a different song for your menus or your pause menu, or when the action cools down. If you're going to have 3 songs, have a song for your climax, whenever things start to heat up, when your HP gets really low, when there's a boss fight, whatever the climax of your game is. Consider giving that a different song instead of having a different song for each level. If you're going to have 4 songs, have another song for winning, right? Think of like Final Fantasy. It's not a different song for each level. It's a song for the action. It's a song for exploration. It's a song in the menu, and it's a song after you win. The reason those songs are so memorable is because they created an auditory language, and you associate those songs with those different feelings. Fade your songs in and out. Don't just stop a song. Fade it out over time. That might be a little bit harder to do, and sometimes when you have time, maybe you don't want to take the time, but try to do that. If you can't have music, have ambient sound. Ambient sound is very easy to do. Wherever you're sitting right now, there's ambient sound. Hit record on your computer or on your phone. You're gonna get some sound out of it. Excuse me. Go to your fridge. Take your phone to your fridge. Put it up to your fridge. Record that sound. That's some good ambient sound. Go to your car. Your car makes noise. Record that sound. That's good ambient sound too. Your heater. Go to your backyard. Depending on where you live, you're going to have different ambient sounds. Right now, if I go outside, I'm going to record a bunch of birds. If I modify that on Audacity, I can make it sound like a jungle. If you live in the city, you're going to get a bunch of cars driving by. So those are all really good ambient sounds. Go to a coffee shop, go to a bar, although maybe right now that's not a good idea. Don't do that. Create flexible systems. Okay, so now I'm just going to get more general. You want systems that can be reused over and over again. If you have a sword swinging mechanic, you want that sword swinging mechanic to be used for different things. Maybe it can open doors, maybe it can destroy crates, maybe it can deflect objects or projectiles. You want systems that are going to be infinitely reusable. Guide your player. Let your player know how to play your game. This is very important because you want to answer players' questions before they even ask them. Um, test your game for, please test your game. Um, test your game a lot and have other people play your game and see other people play your game. And when you have other people test your game, don't tell them how to play it, just watch them and learn from that. And don't listen to what they have to say per se, because they might say something that is they feel to be true, but listen to how they play the game. So now I'm going to go over a few games that I made. I'm trying to get through this really fast. And I'm not sure how much time I have left. So I'm just going to go through a few games that I made. So I was successful in that first year making more than one game, more than more than 50 games actually in that year. I made something about 60 games. And this was like the third or fourth game, but the first real game that felt like a game to me and was actually really quite successful. So the game's name is Camelot Crawl. It's a bullet hell without bullets. So it's a bullet hell set in medieval time. There are no guns. You have a sword to deflect projectiles. The projectiles are like magic and sonar, and characters throw bones at you. This slide is not working, but this was part of a game jam, a weekly game jam. They give you a week to make a game, and I thought this was perfect because I'm trying to make a game every single week. Theme was reflection. So just like I said, know what the purpose of your game is. The purpose was to fulfill this theme of reflection. And I thought I could take a few shortcuts. I thought I was being really clever. I'm going to use some pre-made assets that I found on itch by 0x72. He made this sprite sheet, which I thought was really great. It has everything I need, right? It has backgrounds, has characters, has swords, has decorations, crates, and treasure boxes, everything you might need. But if you look closely, it's missing a crucial component that every game needs, and that's animation. Everything is a single frame here. You can't use this in a game. Everything's going to look weird. So I thought I was taking a shortcut, but my character needed to move. It needed to stand idle. It needed to get hit. Every enemy in the game needed these animations, death animation, attacking, right, swinging a sword. So what ended up happening was that I ended up putting in almost as much work as if I would have not started. This is what the sprite sheet ended up looking like, and it goes off of the screen here. There's actually more sprites up here. I don't know why there's an empty thing, but here they are. This is what I started off with, what I thought was going to be everything that I need, and this is what I ended up with. And the reason being is because that sprite sheet was made for the sake of just showing off this person's skills, not for actually making a game, and definitely not for making my own game. So I learned a very valuable lesson to not use assets, because then I was forced to, every animation that I made, I was forced to do it in the style that he drew in, which is a style that I'm not versed in, something that doesn't come natural to me. So I had to learn a whole different art style just to finish the game. So I try to focus on just a single verb. So you might think that there are many verbs in this game: movement, right, and deflecting, and you can close the door. And these are all actually just one verb. The verb that I was trying to focus on was reflection. So I added this bouncing mechanic, and everything in the game actually works off of this bouncing mechanic. And so sorry about that. So the movement, whenever this character collides with a wall, or whenever a projectile collides with anything, there is this simple bit of code in GameMaker called move, bounce, solid, and that's all my collisions in the entire game. And I was able to use this. Basically, just 2 lines of code. I was able to reuse that in every enemy and in every projectile and in the hero himself. And the whole game is really just built around that. Um, Build interactive systems. So what I ended up doing was allowing the enemies to kill themselves. So if you notice here, the projectiles, if they bounce back and hit themselves, they can actually kill themselves. And the enemies interact with each other. They'll actually start fighting with each other. So anything is an enemy to them, anything that gets close. And this made the game feel really dynamic and alive, so that even if you didn't press a button, things were still going on and you were being pressured to move forward. Special effects. So this was a big deal. If every time you get hit, there's a huge flash in the screen. There's a lightning bolt that's bigger than the screen. Every time a projectile hits a wall or hits an enemy, there's a little spark effect. Anytime a projectile is created or destroyed, there's a spark. Use particle systems. They're cheap and easy, and they're fun, and they're going to add a lot to your game. Answering players' questions. So the first time I had somebody play the game, they were like really confused as to what to do, and they thought they were supposed to go up and attack enemies, and they weren't trying to reflect projectiles as the game was intended to be played. So I readjusted a lot of the earlier levels so that you could see that things were bouncing off and that you were forced to bounce things. And then I added a little tutorial. So displaying messages on the screen is one of the most basic things you could do. It doesn't have to look pretty. It just has to convey information. So I tell the player multiple times, deflect projectiles, deflect projectiles. But even with all those changes, the message is still lost. So try to answer players' questions before they are even asked. There are simple expectations of a game that just you expect every game to do, and that's one of those is having a title screen. You expect when you start up a game that the name of the title, the title of the game, sorry, is going to be displayed at the beginning, and you're going to be prompted to press a button to start. This is a really easy thing to do. Essentially you're just printing text onto the screen. It should be like 1 or 2 lines of code at the most. Just fulfill those expectations. People expect there to be a pause button. If you need to go to the bathroom, you're going to have to pause the game. So people expect to be able to pause. And again, that's just printing simple text onto the screen. Just print the word pause. Presentation is very important. Notice the difference between this title screen, which is just, standard default text, to something where I just chose a font, a different font, and it makes a huge, huge difference. When I ended up drawing this image, I got way more downloads. So the total downloads of the game was about like 2,000 plays when I released it. So they're telling me I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through this really, really fast. So this is another game that I made, but was not very successful. Why? Because the character wasn't interesting. There was nothing unique really about it. Notice how the first level is like a grass level, which every game that has ever existed has had the first level be a grass level. Then this is another game that I did in a global game jam. This is an in-person jam where I met this great artist who does all of these great spine animations, which is the first time I had ever used spine. It was the first time I tried to deal with some sort of serious issue. It's a game about a little girl who's in an abusive household, and she escapes through her imagination. The entire gameplay is just her and her imagination, and in between levels, you hear that there is some sort of domestic abuse problem going on in her real life. My computer froze. So I'm gonna try to get through this if my computer can unfreeze. I have a few more examples of games that I made. At this point, I've made more than 100. I'm not sure exactly of the count. I don't keep count anymore, but I try to make one at least every week. And then I try to catch up in October, where people do Inktober. I try to do like a little prototyping challenge where I do a prototype every day, some kind of a prototype. This upcoming year, I plan to use Unity to prototype. Not sure why this is frozen.